Hello everyone and welcome back to the art table. Today we are going to learn how to do a color wheel properly. A color wheel is helpful for learning how to mix colors. In particular, it helps you figure out the relationship between hues. A hue is the slice of the rainbow that a color is related to. We're going to be making a color wheel that also includes grays, and that's because I want you to become better at mixing complex colors, and you can't mix color well if you don't know how grays work. There are typical stages of growth for beginners as they learn color mixing. I usually see my students go through every one of these stages when I'm introducing painting. The first stage is to not mix the colors at all, but only to use the colors that are provided for you. You will desperately want to have some purple or green. And when you don't have any experience, your confidence in your mixing skills is low, and you think it takes too much time and that you're going to screw it up. After that, you want to start mixing colors based on words rather than what you see. You'll want to mix pink instead of the color of a specific flower petal. Or you're going to want to paint tree trunks brown, even though they're usually much closer to gray-green. Or you will want to paint streets black, even though they are usually blue-gray. In the next stage, you become good at mixing pure hues. You get to the point where you can nail the part of the rainbow that you need to match. And then, it takes a while, but you get good at matching the amount of gray in the colors you mix. Your paint starts to look more refined and mature, and it's based on accurate observation. And then in the last step, you start to alter realistic colors to match an intelligent color scheme for artistic impact. Again, I normally see my students go through every one of these stages as they improve. Let's start off with the primary colors. You've probably been told that the primary colors are red, yellow, and blue. Unfortunately, that's not correct. The actual primary colors are cyan, yellow, and magenta. By mixing together these colors, you'll get a much wider and brighter range of colors than just using red, yellow, and blue. Here, the color wheel on the left has been painted using red, yellow, and blue, and the one on the right uses cyan, yellow, and magenta. Notice which one's brighter. Primary colors are supposed to be pure, unmixable colors, right? Well, later in this demonstration, I'm going to mix a blue using cyan and magenta. And I'm going to mix a red using magenta and yellow. That's supposed to be impossible. And yet, you can't mix a magenta or a cyan using red, yellow, and blue. That's why printer manufacturers use cyan, yellow, and magenta inks and toners to create the widest range of colors for their customers. And this is why we use the exact same pigments as professional printing companies to make your paint. So why do people teach you to use the wrong primary colors? Well, most of the time it's simply because they don't know. I've met college professors who believe in the old primaries and who have simply put up with a lifetime of dull colors. Others know but find it difficult to explain. Try getting grade 1 students to say the word magenta. So, let's make a color wheel. We will start with the primaries. We want the paint to be not too thick and not too thin. But it is better to mix too little paint than too much. When you have a large batch, you keep shoveling more paint in there and it hardly makes a difference. It ends up taking a frustratingly long time and it wastes most of your paint. After the primary colors, we're going to mix the secondaries. Yellow and cyan make green. Yellow and magenta make red-orange. Magenta and cyan make blue-violet. You start by mixing a color that is close to what you want. You test it out on a scrap piece of paper and you see how close you got. Then you ask yourself, which color do I need to push it towards? And then you add that color to balance it. You test it again, and you keep going until you're satisfied. Lastly, we're going to do the tertiaries, the ones that you get when mixing the primaries and the secondaries together. The names of these colors aren't really important. It's much more important that you respond to the flow and balance of the colors in the wheel. Here are some examples of wheels with excellent balance and flow. Now I want to point out that not all colors are equal. There are big differences in intensity, transparency, and expense. Quinacridone magenta is quite powerful, and it's an expensive pigment. It's also really strong. Phthalocyanine blue, the cyan, is extremely powerful. It's almost a bully. It's very transparent, but it's really cheap. Arylide yellow is somewhat opaque, reasonably cheap, but it's really wimpy. I usually have students asking mostly for refills of yellow, and then a few of magenta. Most students never need a refill of cyan. In a perfect world, mixing green would require equal amounts of yellow and cyan. However, cyan's really strong and yellow is weak. You actually need quite a bit of yellow and sometimes just a drop of cyan. That's the difference between color theory and the reality of chemistry. Sometimes people use the paint too thickly when they use watercolors. They treat it like tempera or acrylic. Watercolor is meant to be used more thinly and more transparently. Using too much paint actually ruins the impact of watercolor. The maximum intensity of a color is not when the paint is thickest. That's because of saturation density. There's a point when using too much paint actually makes it look worse. Yellow starts to look flat, magenta starts to look like dried blood, and cyan starts to become super dark with a magenta sheen to it. With watercolor paint, the color comes from light transmitting through the paint, bouncing off the paper, and then back to your eye. If you use too much pigment, the light never reaches the paper. Here's something that might sound like a contradiction. Always wait for your painting to dry, but never stop painting. Adjusting colors and adding detail usually works best if your paper is fairly dry. How long it takes to dry depends on the temperature and humidity. In Nova Scotia, this is fastest on sunny days in both winter and summer. Thin, crappy paper tends to behave like a sponge and it takes longer to dry. But waiting for paint to dry really just means you're avoiding work. Instead, you should work on a different section of the painting while the first one dries. Your color wheel is not going to be perfect on your first try. Some colors will be too light, and some colors will be off a little, and they're going to need adjusting so that your color wheel flows correctly. The easiest and most beautiful way to deal with this is to adjust your hues with transparent layers. The key is to think in terms of which color you need to add on top. It's very easy to add watercolor. Let the section you want to adjust dry. Then think about which direction you need to adjust your color towards, and then add a thin layer of that pure color. The two colors mix on the page and shift towards the color you want. It is always much faster to adjust a color than to mix it perfectly in the first place. And then you keep going until the color wheel flows and balances well. You keep looking for which hue feels out of place, and then you look at your color wheel to help you see which color needs to be added. In the end, you should have a nice, even flow of hues around the outside of the wheel.